Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining from. This is Jim McKeeth. Welcome to Delphi Build Automation and Supply Chain Security. Listen to a weird shadow from this window here. Natural light is nice, but it really pushes the limits of cameras. Going to give a couple seconds here as everybody's joining still. Hope you're all having a fantastic week. All right, I'm going to go ahead and let's see, can I just minimize that? There we go. All right, so let's get started. Hello, Mateus. I'm sorry. That's I love your name, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Thanks for joining, though. Here, I can show it on the screen. SZ at the end. Not something I know how to pronounce. All right. So this is Delphi Build Automation and Supply Chain Security. My name is Jim McKeeth. I am the director of GDK Software USA and a Delphi MVP. Before joining GDK, I was the Embarcadero Chief Developer Advocate for over 30 years. I've been developing software for 30 years. Actually, I was doing the math. I'm coming up on 40 years, which is kind of scary. But to be fair, I did start software development really, really young. Commodore VIC-20 when I was a wee lad, and just knew that's what I wanted to do. Although it wasn't professional software development, it was just what I loved doing at that point. Oh, we got more hellos coming in here. Hi from Cape Town. I think fantastic is the operative word. It really seems like we're in sort of a fantasy. Yes, life has been crazy. Hello from Brazil. Much excited to learn more about build automations. Fantastic. And Gregor, hello from Surat, India. Great, thanks for joining us, Gregor. Multiple patents, worked on lots of languages and platforms. I've done a lot of variety of different things over the years. So, oops. There it is. So, yeah. Let's see. Dogini, hello. So about GK Software, if you're not familiar with us, we have offices in the US, UK, Netherlands, and Brazil. We have over 25 Delphi development experts. We're expert Delphi consultants. One thing I love about GDK Software, and the reason I want to join them, is that we have I visited 3 of the 4 offices now, and each office has a very strong community in it. We have monthly, they call them Vivid Days, where you get to take a whole day to do your own research and development, whether it be learning things, figuring things out, whatever. They also have annual company days where everybody from all the different offices come together in one location to share information. And then we have regular knowledge sessions where we have webinars, internal webinars, where we share different things, teach each other things. So the thing about this is it really does a great job of, or this communication internally does a good job of enhancing the ability to work together. And so if you are doing programming and you're like, I can't figure this out, because programming is really complicated, right? And the idea that one person is going to know everything is not realistic. So, but when you have this great community internally and this, everybody knows each other and they're always educating each other, then when you're stuck on something, you know who's going to have the answer, and you can go talk to them and they can give you that answer quickly. And so it makes everybody more productive. It's just a fantastic place. Lots of great developers. And we are really good at Delphi consulting. So if you know anybody that needs Delphi consulting, gdksoftware.com. Also, we have our Codalex. New version 2.0 is now free. It's more than just a low-code solution for Delphi. Highly recommend you take a look at that, although that's not the what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so with that, let's get started. So I'm going to start with kind of some why and some theory, some of the news and headlines that have influenced some upcoming regulations around this. And then we're going to talk about the implementation, how to put things into practice, some of the tools, some resources, examples. The goal, here's a list of goals. I think it's a good idea to have a list of goals so that you know what I'm introducing, and then at the end I can see if you can see if we've met those. That was obviously useful for me in putting this together. So the world has changed. 2020, I forgot this was in 2020. SolarWinds, you probably heard about this, was a huge catastrophe back in 2020. It was a supply chain attack. And so what happened was SolarWinds had their software, their management software installed on all these computers, and somebody was able to compromise that system so that, let's see what I'm making that. Compromise their build system. And so then when SolarWinds pushed out an update that then introduced the backdoor, they created their own zero-day exploit that they were then installed onto over 18,000 organizations, including government agencies. It was a huge, huge, huge disaster and really a big wake-up call. Then we had the Log4 shell, which is where Log4j had this really big vulnerability in it, allowing remote code execution. And Log4j was used in lots of different programs, installed on lots of different locations. And the problem is all of a sudden you hear, oh, Log4j has this vulnerability, you need to patch it. And everybody's like, do we have Log4j? We don't know if we do. We have programs. Oh, this program is using Log4j. What version of Log4j is it using? Don't know. And so the problem was we had this huge problem, but then no one knew if they were infected or not, or what actions to take. And so you had a lot of people just running around, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to address the situation. This one was interesting in that it was almost a catastrophe. So good thing it wasn't. This was the XZ utils. This was one where someone went through this large process of implanting this backdoor in XZ utils. Huge social engineering thing. And it luckily was discovered right as it was going into, it was in the development builds of potentially being on all Linux distributions. And luckily someone discovered it, noticed it shortly or fairly quickly, and they were able to patch it before it went out in production. So that was potentially a really big problem as well. And so all these things are kind of building up that the world we live in is kind of crazy. And then just recently here we had CrowdStrike, which wasn't an attack, thankfully, but again, a release went out to lots of computers. I didn't put the number here. It was millions and millions. You've heard about this. And they crashed everything. And even if your computers weren't crashed, you probably depended on computers that were crashed. And then there was a number of issues with that as well. So what's happening here is the industry has had a lot of things that are happening that are causing people to really look at what are our build processes like, what are our release processes, how is software being distributed, and how can we make this more secure? Now, I talk to people a lot about this, is they're like, oh, well, I'm just making a simple blah, 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 and it's not used in anything important. It's just this little simple library. It's just this little simple program. It's a calculator or whatever. The reality is, and if you go back to the one that had the XKCD comic with when I talk about ZXUtils or XUtils, is everything's built on top of each other, and plus you have this thing called lateral movement, where you can have one piece of unimportant software, unimportant code that can be the chink in the armor that can let somebody come in. So instead of going straight to what they're looking for, they go through this unimportant thing and get back. If you haven't read Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll, which was written, a long time ago, that's definitely a graybeard thing to say, reference book. Highly recommended, because that's what was going on there, is that someone was coming in through a one system that was not important to access important systems. There's a video on YouTube called The KGB, The Computer and Me, which is about the same thing, Clifford Stoll. Really fascinating. Basically, it was the foundation of all the it was like the first serious computer crime. And so a lot of the things that we now take for granted today, as far as being able to deal with this, was established because of this here. It seems CrowdStrike had a process. Yes, yeah, and so exactly that. They have a blog post you can read, or not blog post, incident response, something like that. If you go to their website, it's on the top. And David, and they say essentially, they're like, hey, these are some things we're going to do. And if you look at the list, you're like, these are things you should have been doing before, especially when you had that number of computers that you're reaching out to. And it's really just, it boggles my mind, honestly, that this happened, because it shouldn't have. And you have a situation where they were releasing. I'll opine on this for a second here. What happens is you get you're able to release consistent builds for a while, and you get lazy. Okay. I don't know all the details, but this is about CrowdStrike. But generally speaking, when you're doing something and you're successful at it for a long time, then you don't feel like you need the safety guards in place, and you start to maybe tighten things up to where you're too far. And so it's important that you do have processes and policies in place, and that you follow those even when you don't feel like you need them. Because, yeah, that's just really unacceptable. Okay. So yes, all code is important. All programs are important. If it's running on a computer, on a network, which is everything, then it is important. Okay. It can impact other software on the computer. It can impact other computers on the network. So there's some new regulations coming down. Basically, this is like when the EU ruled that Apple had to put the USB-C ports on all their phones. Apple knew they should have done that, but they didn't, because they wanted to have the two big reasons. One was they got licensing money off people licensing that port, the Lightning port for them. And two, that port was USB 2 speeds. And so interestingly, even though they went to USB-C, it's still on, like, I don't know if it's still the case, but when they first introduced it, they first rolled it out, the non-Pro phones were still only USB 2 speeds. And that slower speed on the port made it easier to upsell people to iCloud. And so it's like, oh, you could back up over the really slow USB port, or you could back up to iCloud, which will give you a subscription for it. So, yeah, they were doing that for reasons that were not good for the customer, not good for the end user. And the EU stepped in and forced them to do it. Now, unfortunately, when they step in and force them to do it, there are downsides to it, right? It says, oh, we have to use USB-C, now USB-D comes out, right? There's lots of arguments why that's the regulation coming in is a bad thing. But the fact that Apple did not address it means that the government has to come in. And so what we're seeing is we've seen a number of things where the private sector has made huge fumbles. And so the government's come in and said, okay, we're going to start telling you how to do your job, which is unfortunate in some regards, but is I think it has some good advantages as well. So the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification is introduced in the U.S., and this is currently a requirement for U.S. Department of Defense contractors and their supply chain. Now, the Department of Defense is the biggest chunk of where the U.S. spends its money, 12% of the total federal budget. In 2023, roughly $400 billion was spent by the Department of Defense to their contractors and external companies. So that you have a number of big contractors in there that are getting a chunk of that, but then they have subcontractors and supply chain, right, that go down. And you might be in there someplace, right? You might not think you are, but your program or your software or your code may be going up the supply chain and eventually getting there. And so what's happening is, as this is being introduced and being pushed down, more and more people are going to be impacted with it over time. Eventually, it may be easier to say everybody needs to have needs to follow this model. So whether or not you're in that supply chain or not, this is something to expect. Now, the good news is it's based on best practices. Basically, they took a bunch of best practices and says, you have to do these. So it's not just the US. The EU has their Cybersecurity Act as well, which initially the certification is voluntary, but the act does allow for them to make them mandatory. And this will impact anybody doing business with an EU member state. So again, I realize the audience is international here, so you may be doing business with the EU, or maybe doing business with the US, or you might not be, but supply chains are long, right? It's possible that somewhere, right, along the chain, you are involved with somebody who is doing business with them. Or also, these are just two examples. There are other countries that are introducing similar regulations and laws and recommendations as well. So this is something you need to be aware of. So luckily, there are some overlap here between these. So you don't necessarily have to right now, it's a little nebulous because we have some different competing standards, but there is overlap between those standards. And so eventually something will emerge that does satisfy multiple or the majority of these, so that you are able to address these regulations without having to, go across a number of things. One of the things that they're working on is called software bill of materials, a new regulation. And in the US, they just introduced something similar to this for broadband, which the idea is that it's this, like, similar to a nutrition label is the example that I've heard, that on all foods, you have this nutrition label that describes what it is in the food you're eating, what the how healthy it is for you. And the so that customers can buy broadband and they can say, oh, this is what I'm getting. This is how it's going to work. This is the performance, etc. And so there's a number of so the software bill of materials is a general idea. A number of different companies and countries are starting to require this in different areas, and there are then standards that are trying to satisfy all of these requirements across all the different organizations and countries. And here's a list of some of those standards that are coming out. So this is like I was talking about before, is that you have industry standards that are trying to meet the requirements of the different organizations. All right, enough theory, enough why. Hopefully, I mean, you're here, so hopefully you're probably already on board with this. But let's talk about how to put this into action for Delphi developers. This is hopefully basic, but I thought it would be worth mentioning, is that the difference between clean versus compile versus build. Clean removes the output of previous builds. Compile only compiles what's changed since the last build or compile, where build always builds everything. So a clean and a build is technically redundant, although I have had situations where I swear that's the answer. Just like sometimes you have to turn it back off and back on again. But essentially, a build is like a clean plus a compile. Now, actually, I'll back up. One difference between a clean and a build is sometimes you have things that are outside of the build process that are in the build, that deploy things to the build directory. And so a clean and a build can clean those things up as well, whereas a build only would not. One note, though, with this is that in a project group, when you have multiple projects you're building all at once, a clean and compile is more efficient than a build, because a build will build all of the files each time, even if those files are shared between different projects. So you want to use a clean and a compile most likely. Now, if you get into the CMMC model, the maturity model, one of the things in there is that this idea of, and I think it's, so there was originally 5 levels and they're going to 3 levels in the new one. Level 1, I got the slides on this later, but the 3rd level has this idea of the way you're managing your build environment. And one of the requirements is that there's nothing from build to build. So each build is completely clean and completely reproducible. And that means completely rebuilding your build environment, between builds, release builds, okay? I should have put a slide on this one as well. I did. First of all, when you're doing development work, that's where you're running it from the IDE, right? Anything that is shipping to a end user or a tester should be built on a build server, right? Which means it's not from your IDE, because if it's from your IDE, there's just way too many variables that can happen in your IDE. Like I said earlier, sometimes you have to close the IDE and reopen it, right? You have to restart your computer because you get these weird behaviors. And you don't want that in your build that's going out to other users, right? As a developer, yes, just hit the run button, right? You need that fast turnaround. It's one of the reasons we love Delphi. But when as soon as it's going to somebody else to use, run on a different computer, it needs to go through a build process, because that is more controlled and it's reproducible. If that makes sense. All right, so let's talk about some build automation. The simplest solution is MSBuild. You already have it configured. It's what is built into RAD Studio. Delphi and C++ builders are already using MSBuild. And so you can use this, start using it right away. All you have to do is run the rsvars.bat from command.exe or use the RAD Studio command prompt. And then you can use MSBuild and then your project, your dproj, or your group proj. It'll work with either one. But if you run it on your dproj, the first example there will just do whatever configuration you had in your IDE, right? So if you're in the IDE, you selected platform Win32 config debug, and then MSBuild that, it'll do exactly that. Whereas the second one will let you override that. You can say, okay, I want to build for a specific platform. I want to build for a specific config. You can do that as well. There's some documentation there for both Embarcadero and Microsoft MSBuild. A couple more examples here. Simply, your target, your T, can either be build or clean. Clean means to remove everything from the previous build, whereas build is building it. Then everything with a P here. So the T, build or clean, is an instruction for MSBuild, whereas the Ps are, and actually the target here on this one as well. Yes, because it's adding a new target. So these two are added or passed on to the Delphi compiler. Okay. So, and then this is a target. So the T target is I didn't want to go too deep into the MSBuild. There's a lot of documentation on MSBuild. So if you go out and look at MSBuild, you can find a lot of information on this. But you can define additional targets, and there's actually documentation in the Embarcadero doc wiki on this and how to define additional targets. But then, yeah, the P is a parameter that is passed to the compiler, the Delphi compiler, whereas these targets are ran in MSBuild. They're executed by MSBuild. Probably too much trying to make a distinction there. But yeah, so you can do a cleaner build. You can target different configurations. Usually, by default, we only have debugger release, but you can define additional configurations, and then you can specify what platform you want to go through as well. So another thing is build groups. And you may not be aware of these because they're kind of not obvious, or I didn't think they're obvious, is if you build a project group. So you have the project group is a collection of projects. There's a button up here at the top that says right there, you can see the number 1 next to it, that shows the build group pane. And once you have a build group pane, you can create a new build group. You can give it whatever name you want to. And then you can go through each project and you can either check or uncheck that project to be included in the build group. And then you can specify what configurations, can be a single configuration or multiple configurations, and what platforms, one platform or multiple platforms, you want that built for. And so then you can use MSBuild on the group proj. So you can use it on a group proj regularly, or you can pass in a build group. And when you pass in a build group, the name of one of your build groups, so in this case, I have a build group named Runtime, you can then have it build all of the projects in your build group in one pass. So this means you don't have to call MSBuild multiple times. You can call MSBuild once, and it goes through and does all of those at once. Now, one caveat, and I spent way too much time on this one, is it didn't seem to be maintaining the build order in my build group. And I actually went and looked into the group proj source, and I could see that it was sorting it by a different sort order. I couldn't remember what it was, but even if I went and edited the sort order in this group proj, it would resort it again when I opened it in IDE. So I did file a bug report. It's possible I'm missing something there, but that seemed like that was an issue, so that might not be the best solution, but I did want to tell you about it anyway, especially if you have something that doesn't require build orders. So if you do have something that requires build orders, you might have to divide it up into multiple groups and build those groups individually. But if you don't, then this is a good solution here. This was something Glenn Duffke just pointed out to me, the structured log view. It does require updating the build tools. So I can't remember what version of build tools Embarcadero Delphi ships with, but you can upgrade it to 2022. Now, I should look this up. A while back, for the longest time, they were using a very, very old version of MSBuild. And then not that long ago, they upgraded to a newer version, and that newer version is compatible with the 2022 version. So if you're on an old version of Delphi, and I don't remember, I should look that up. So this only works with the most, I think 11 and 12, maybe 10.4. I'm not sure about 10.4. But you can upgrade it to Well, if you try it and see, you install the MSBuild tools, and then you edit your rsvars.bat to point to the new directory where new MSBuild is installed. And once you do that, you can then run MSBuild with the BL parameter. And doing that creates a binary log. And this is a very detailed log of what happened during the build process. And then you can use structured log viewer, which you can get from msbuildlog.com, and you can install it via Winget, and it will give you this detailed log of what happened. Now, you're really going to get the most benefit from this if you're creating your own custom MSBuild scripts and not using the ones generated by the IDE, because there's way more functionality available in MSBuild that is not being leveraged by the IDE. That being said, the IDE does what it needs to do with MSBuild, but there's way more you can do. And once you start doing that, you're going to see that you want to have a good ability to go back and look at builds. What happened? Why did this build fail? Why is this build different? The output of this build different from previous builds and stuff like that. And that's something that structured log view will give you. Okay, so I had this earlier, but I moved it towards the end because I don't know, maybe it made sense to put it at the beginning. But I mentioned this before. This is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. There's 3 levels on the new one, and level 1 is self-assessed. There's a 50-page guide you can download right there for free. Go check it out, and that has there's 17 domains, which I have listed here in the next slide, and those domains reference the National Institute of Standards document, SP 800-171, which just came out with revision 3. This can be really, actually, I thought about just doing a whole webinar just going through this, because I think it is interesting. It discusses a lot of things about best practices and such. And so this is currently self-assessed. So you just need to go through this and evaluate where you're at and choose points. It's a 50-page guide for level 1, and then you can have a CMMC level 1. So actually, maybe I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna put that on the schedule to go through this in detail, because I think that could be quite interesting. But you can go download these for free. Like I said, they're available for free, and they're based on best practices. So this is not just a potential regulation that can help you with customers, but also a good idea. These are 17 domains that are listed in there. So access control, for example, who has access to what, risk assessment, there's configuration management, contingency plans. It's a good idea to have a plan. What is my contingency if CrowdStrike crashes everything? How do I deal with that, right? These are just good ideas. Now, excuse me, this is a U.S. National Institute of Standards is a U.S. body, and so this is a U.S.-centric guide, but internationally, the ISO, there's IEC 27001 and 27002 are international versions. And from what I've seen, there's a lot of overlap between these. So interestingly, though, the US ones are free. The ISO ones you have to pay for. They're like a couple hundred or 100 something, not dollars, but yeah, they're not cheap, which I was kind of surprised. So maybe if you're not in the US, it might still be worth starting with this one. Go through it, get an idea of it. Like I said, there's a lot of overlap between them, and they are based on general best practices. Okay, software build of materials. This is really to address the like Log4j or Log4Shell incident, but is really a good idea as well. And the idea is that you're giving the end user and people further along the supply chain ingredients of what is in what you're providing them. Cyclone DX is one of the standards that is coming out. And actually, so just June 26th, just a little over a month ago, it was ratified as an international standard, ECMA 424. So this is a really good one to look at if you're wanting to, if you're like, I don't know what to do about software bill of materials, go check this one out. It's they have many open source and free tools, lots of different integrations. They have a free 75 authoritative guide that you can download, doesn't require you to pay for it. And it also is not just for, it's not just software bill of materials, but they cover a number of other things, hardware, machine learning, cryptography, etc. So very worthwhile to check out. Again, I could probably do an entire webinar just on that there as well. It's by OWASP, which they do a lot of other things as well. Okay, so I'm gonna do a demonstration now. I figured it's one thing to talk about this stuff from a high level, but I thought it would be better to kind of put it together. And so I took this project here, which is a project that I'm still involved in with the Python for Delphi data sciences library. And I went through and said, how can I integrate some of this stuff? Because it had been being done as being done manually. And let's see, I'm getting some notifications here. Oh, excellent. There we go. All right. I thought I had muted my notifications, but apparently I hit the wrong button. So yeah, this was something I was doing the manual in the IDE builds, which is not good. So instead I said, how do I automate this? How to make this reproducible? And so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so this I'm just showing the installing of the MSBuild. And I used the WinGet, but it does the same thing whether you download it and run it. And all you have to do is find MSBuild, which is the new folder it's going to be put in here, is the Visual Studio 2022, and then go edit your RSVARs in your your Delphi bin folder, which the old Notepad would elevate permissions when you edited it if you tried to save into a folder that wasn't you couldn't save to. The new one doesn't do that anymore. So even though they made all these improvements to Notepad, they took that one feature away. But yeah, once you do that and run it, then you're able to use the which I don't know why that's in the, oops, hold on. There's. Oh, okay, that's in the, okay. Sorry, so this is, I'm gonna show build groups. So you can build an individual project, or you can build an individual project, or you can build the entire group, which you'll notice all these are, they're not all going the same configuration and platform because there are some differences in there, but you could set them all to one or the other, right? Coming in here and selecting a platform or a configuration. Then once you bring up build groups, you can go through each of these individually and either uncheck or check them depending on the build group, and you can come in and select what platforms, what configurations you want each one built for. And then once you do that, you can build the current, you can compile the current, or clean the current build group. You can also duplicate it in order to make different ones. So now if you look at this, you'll see it's building each project for multiple platforms and multiple releases. So this is great from an IDE point of view, but like I said, you're only building from the IDE for development purposes, right? You're not building from the IDE for anything you're going to ship to end users. So let's take a look at the what that would look like shipping to end users. So I'm going to put this all together here, and I want to show that this is reproducible by going up, and I'm going to delete this project and its dependencies. And then we'll use GitHub or use whatever source control utility you're using. I'm using the GitHub desktop. And I'll just clone down the main project, the one I want to build. Now this one has a, there you go. That's the one I want. Oh, and this is, you can add this in here. I'm just going here to settings. You say add new profile. You want to copy command prompt and then just append this /k and the path to rsvars, and then put up the icon so it looks fancy. So the first thing I want to do is I have a script here that I'll show you. So I have a list of dependencies, and it has the GitHub repository and the path I wanted to go into, and then I have both a getDepends.bat and a getDepends PowerShell script. So depending on which flavor you're in right now. So I'll say getDepends. And it's going to go out there and grab the dependencies. I think there's a way to put this into PowerShell. And I can run this again, and it will go and check to make sure they're up to date. Ideally, this should have like a certain revision that it goes for, or a version number or something like that, or a specific branch. But for right now, this works perfectly. So if we go back into here and I refresh, we'll see there is those 4 directories are back again. So I'm going to use build all, which is going to, actually I should move this to the end. So it's going to call rsvars, just in case I haven't already done that, and then use getDepends again to make sure I have the latest version of my dependencies. And then it's going to use the group project to build just the runtime packages. I don't want to rebuild the design time packages, although I could do complete. Since I have 3 different build groups. And I've also got this here for the binary log, so I can show you that as well. Let's go ahead and run this. Actually, I'll just do runtime. Make it a little quicker. Build, I guess it's not technically build all. So it's going to take a few minutes to run. Yeah, there's just a wall of paths there. You can't really, not much to see because it just keeps flashing past. Oh, you do get this error message here, and I can't figure out how to get rid of it on Windows 11. Or not, it's not an error, it's a warning. Oh, it's done. Okay, so then it has taken my dependencies. So I have this Python script here that opens that depends text file and converts it into a Cyclone DX bomb, which I can open up. Where's it at? There it is. I don't know why it always does that. Okay, here's the bomb, which just says latest, not very useful. I don't think, but I'm still working on this, trying to make this better. But it does show the dependencies that are in there. And so then now, when another project is built using the P4D data sciences, it can incorporate this into its BOM. Oh, I was also going to show, so this is a MSBuild file, the project group. Now, if you scroll down here, you can find, let's see. Yeah, so here's a project group, one of the project groups or build groups in it. And for some reason, it reorders these. I don't know why. Because if you look up here, it's doing in the right order, Python, Python VCL, Python MSFMX. But then if you go down to here, it's reordered it. And if I tried reordering them manually, which is what you're going to have to do if you want to reproduce this. So you might not be able to use the one generated by the IDE, at least not without modification, or maybe you can write a script to clean it up or whatever. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do is I want to load this here. So this is the MSBuild structured log viewer. And this gives you a chance to just really dive into understanding what happened during the build. So you get this timeline here that shows you, it just shows everything in there. The build group is one step. Well, that's interesting. That's not the way I would have done that, but that's okay. We can go to the log and we can see what were the most expensive tasks. Again, just the build group, because the build group ran as one task. So I guess a build group maybe not the best way to do this. It'd probably be better to have the MSBuild script build multiple files, but I was trying to lean into the things Delphi provides in the IDE. But you can search through this as well if you want to find search in the files. I thought I had a fire back in here. Oh, find your files. There we go. Nope. I was doing it on not the build group before. You can bring up the files and view files in here as well. Here's the default target file that is included with Delphi Rad Studio, but you can make additional targets as well if you want to add other functions for MSBuild. It's a very powerful build solution. Okay. I feel like I glossed over a lot of things there, but hopefully give you an introduction to these few different things about how to do this. So kind of wrap this up here. I feel like we've addressed their goals. I think I tried to cram too much in here and get as much detail as I'd like to, so hopefully I'll follow up on some of these with some more details. But I do want to end up with some resources for you here. I had these links above, but there's some more on MS Builder, but then also point out Final Builder, which is a Delphi-powered build solution. It's Delphi-powered, and specifically understands Delphi, works well with Delphi, but also works for other things. So it's not just for Delphi. Jenkins is a general purpose CI/CD, pretty popular one across the industry out there. That's what I know a lot of people use as well. And then there's the link for Cyclone DX SBOM and the links for CMMC and NIST. Okay. Oh, I should have had my email in there. But go ahead and go to Q&A. If you have any questions, put them in the question panel. Let me know if you'd like to see more. I mean, you're here, so obviously you're interested in this. But if there was a specific thing that you're like, oh, I wish you'd gone into more detail on that, that would be useful to know. So, yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the question panel. If you would like me to go into more details on in the future on whether it be the CMMC or MSBuild script customization or any of those things, yeah, can certainly do that. I noticed, so this is the first time I built a system like this up from the ground up, essentially. So I learned a lot in the process as well, although it's something that I've been involved in and working with other people that are building and maintaining these. So there's a lot of things that's like, oh, that should be easy. It's like, oh, that's a little more complicated than I thought. But yeah. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. I know there's a bit of a lag between the, there's a delay from what I'm saying to what you're getting, but I think there's enough time everybody's heard that we're good at the end here to questions, and I'm not seeing any questions. So, all right, well, thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you in the future at more of our webinars. You can see some of the upcoming webinars at mailing.gaksoftware.com/webinars, and webinars with an S, where we'll have future webinars being announced there. If you didn't register, do register there, because that's how you will get the email with slides and things like that, as well as information about future webinars. So, yeah, again, my name is Jim McKeeth. Thanks for joining, and we will see you online. Oh, let's see. Oh, some comments did come in. Great, I'm glad to hear that, Gregor. It's honestly, it's something I always try and figure out how the best way to do is to educate or to teach new things without going too deep that I leave her, or not leave her behind, but that it's hard to like hit the mark. So I'm glad it's good to hear you learn something. David said that he needs to rewatch the second part of the presentation. Oh, have questions later. Yes. Actually, I wanted to, there's so much more I wanted to do, but just didn't have time for putting in here there's a lot of, this is getting more and more important all the time. We are just way more connected. Software is running everywhere, and it's really, really, really important that we do this right, because it can have huge, huge, huge impacts as we continually see. So great. All right. All right, well, with that, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the future at future webinars. Take care.